Hi, in this video we'll see how to subtract mixed numbers. We'll look at two ways to do this. The first with negative fractions and the second with borrowing, which you might be more familiar with. Let's take a look at subtracting mixed numbers with negative fractions. This is a good method to use if you understand how to subtract a fraction from a whole number. So I've got 2 and 1/5 minus 1 and 7/10. The first thing I want to do is get a common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite 2 and 1/5 as 2 and 2/10. And I want to subtract 1 and 7/10. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract the whole numbers from each other. So 2 minus 1 is 1. The next thing I want to do is subtract the fractions from each other. And it's okay that I'll get a negative fraction because the first numerator is smaller than the second. So 2/10 minus 7/10 is 5/10. 1 minus 5/10, well, 1 is equal to 10/10. 1 minus 5/10 is going to be 5/10. And I want to reduce that fraction to 1/2. So 2 1/5 minus 1 and 7/10 is going to be equal to 1/2. Let's see how that looks with our model here. I've got 2 1/5 minus 1 and 7/10. First thing I would do is I would take away the 1. Then I want to take away 7/10. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10. You can see here, once I take away 1 and 7/10, I'm left with 1/2. Okay, let's take a look at a second example here. I've got 4 and 3/8. I've got four full shapes there and 3/8 of another shape. I need to rewrite this with common denominators, so I'm going to have 4 and 3/8 minus 2. 8 is my least common denominator, and 3/4 is equal to 6/8. So 4 and 3/8 minus 6/8. First thing I want to do is subtract my whole numbers from each other. 4 minus 2 is 2. 3/8 minus 6/8. That's going to give me a negative 3/8. So I want to subtract 3/8 from 2. Well, if I have 2 and I subtract 3/8 from it, 3/8 is not even a whole, so I'll have at least one left over with a little bit more. Well, if I take away 8/8 minus 3/8, I'm going to get 1 and 5/8 when I subtract that. Let's see how this works with our model. So I've got 4 and 3/8, and I want to take away 2 and 6/8 from it. So here's taking away my whole numbers, those 2. Now I want to take away 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see I'm left with one whole and then 5/8 of another shape. Now let's see how to subtract mixed numbers when we borrow. Again, I've got 2 and 1/5 minus 1 and 7/10. So we're going to see the same problem, but now with a different method. I still want this common denominator, so I've got 2 and 2/10 minus 1 and 7/10. Well, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow 1 from the whole number. So let's try to understand what happens when we borrow 1 from the whole number. This is 2 here. This is 2/10 here. When I borrow 1, what I'm really doing is I'm just dividing the shape a little bit differently. I've got 1, and then here I've got 10/10 and 2/10. Together, that is 12/10. So I could rewrite 2 and 2/10 as 1 and 12/10. Then I can subtract 1 and 7/10 from that number. 1 minus 1 is 0. 12/10 minus 7/10, that is 5/10, or 1/2. And this last example here, I've got 4 and 3/8 minus 2 and 3/4. Again, I want a common denominator. I've got 4 and 3/8, but now instead of writing it as 4, I want to borrow 1 from it. So I'm going to write it as 3, and then how can I express this other piece here? Well, there's 8 in this full one here, plus 3 more in the partial, so that's 3 and 11/8. So 4 and 3/8 is the same thing as 3 and 11/8. And I want to subtract 2 and 6/8 from that. Well, 3 minus 2 is 1, and 11 minus 6 is 5. So my answer is going to be 1 and 5/8. Okay, here's one for you to practice on your own, and we'll look at it both ways with negative fractions and with borrowing, so you can see how to solve it depending on the way you choose. All right, let's take a look how to solve this with negative fractions. 33 is the least common denominator. Well, 15 and 3/11. I have to multiply 11 times 3 to get 33, so I'll multiply 3 times 3 and get 9. Minus 6 and 2/3. I had to multiply 3 by 11 to get 33, so I have to multiply 2 by 11, and I'll get 22. Okay, I'm going to subtract my whole numbers from each other. 15 minus 6, that is equal to 9. And now I want to subtract the fractions from each other. 9/33 minus 22/33. 9/33 minus 22/33 is negative 13/33. Finally, I want to subtract here 9 minus 13/33. Well, I know 9. Take away 13/33, I'll have 8 wholes left over, and then part of that 9 without the 13/33 in it is going to be 20/33. So we get 8 and 20/33 as our answer. If you borrowed, again, we'll rewrite these with common denominators. And now I want to borrow. So I'm going to take 1 away from my 15, and that's a 14. And what I want to do with that 1 I took away, it's 33/33. I want to add that to 9/33. So that's 42/33. So 14 and 42/33 minus 6 and 22/33 is going to be equal to, well, 14 minus 6 is 8. 42 minus 22 is 20. We get the same answer no matter which way we choose, 8 and 20/33. And that's how we subtract mixed numbers.